Rookie draft season is in full swing, one of my absolute favorite times of the year. In the last video, I talked about rookies that I'm targeting in drafts right now at their current costs. Today, we're going to talk about rookies that you should let your league mates draft. Look, you can't love every rookie. It's super fun to go through every prospect and try to figure out, what are the things in this profile that are interesting that you can latch onto and paint the story of how this player succeeds in the NFL. But the truth is, you can't love every prospect. You can't draft every prospect, especially if you only have a couple of leagues. But even somebody like me who plays in a lot of dynasty leagues, if I want to be above the market on certain players, if I want to have additional exposure, lots of shares of certain players, I necessarily have to fade other players and have less of them. So what I'll be going over here are not necessarily rookies that I think are going to bust, but they're rookies where the profile just doesn't entice me quite as much as some of the other profiles in this class. And I'm content to be under the market or fade these players entirely if it means that I can get more of the other players that I like. As with the first video, this is about players at cost. So I will be referencing their current rookie ADPs according to Dynasty Data Lab. That is what I'll be referring to. At the end of the video, I'm also going to throw in a bonus player to target that I didn't cover in the last video. So make sure you stick around to the end for that. Let's get into the fades. All right, as with the last video, I'm going to start near the top of the draft board, and I think this is the one that's probably going to upset the most people. It's Odunze, whose current rookie ADP is the 105 in Superflex leagues. That puts him right after Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison, Jaden Daniels, and Malik Neighbors. And it puts him ahead of two players that I talked about in the last video that I am targeting in Drake May and Brock Bowers. So really what this comes down to is just liking those two players more than Odunze. Odunze himself, very good prospect. I think he's more than likely going to succeed in the NFL. He could succeed in a big way. His 2023 season was fantastic. His junior production was also really strong if you consider his target competition. He gets drafted in the top 10, and now he's tethered to Caleb Williams for the next 4 seasons. So there's a lot to like about Odunze, and I do hope that I get some of him in this rookie cycle. I don't really want to be sitting there with no shares of Rome Odunze, but I am prioritizing those other two players. I just think May and Bowers are both better prospects at their positions than Odunze is, and also they play more scarce positions. I think there's more room for value gains. Someone like May, if he really has a strong rookie season, you can see him jump up into that first, second round of startups conversation. If Brock Bowers does deliver despite a difficult situation, he is going to be hard to obtain in leagues because there just aren't enough tight ends to go around. Whereas Odunze, I think, being in an offense with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore is going to make his life a little difficult at first. I don't think he's going to have kind of a JSN rookie season where he's going to crash in value, but I think it'll be hard for him to have a season that distances him from the other wide receivers. And so, I don't really expect any of these guys to have league winning production in year one, but I see more of a path for May and Bowers to become unattainable dynasty assets or, much more expensive assets. Whereas Odunze, I think he's going to have trouble cracking into that top tier, at least right away. Now at 107 or later, I'm thrilled to get him. I would be trading up to get him if he's sitting there at 107. It's really just about those two players going after him. My next guy is another first rounder in Brian Thomas, whose rookie ADP right now is the 110. I view him as part of a large tier that stretches from the 109 to the 201 or the 202, includes guys like McConkey, Xavier Worthy, Bo Nix, Jonathan Brooks. I like all those guys about the same, but I think Brian Thomas is actually my least favorite of that tier, and he's going near the top of it. He's going 10th, so, second guy to that group after the elite tier. The thing with Brian Thomas is that I don't think he's going to be a bust. I think he has a better than average chance of being a good NFL wide receiver. I'm just not sure that's going to translate to a ton of fantasy success, even in a Trevor Lawrence offense. He was a downfield threat in college. He did not command high volume at LSU, even in his final season. His targets per out run didn't crest 20%. He was very much an efficiency-driven wide receiver. He had 17 touchdowns. He was catching a lot of deep passes, and I think he can do some of that in the NFL, but that's not the archetype of player that's typically putting up league-winning production. You just look at the wide receivers that are being drafted early. They aren't really producing the way that Brian Thomas produces. I don't see a clear ceiling comp for him. He looks more like a T. Higgins type, somebody who's going to be regarded as a high-end wide receiver 2 in an offense, not necessarily a bona fide alpha, and that's a great guy to have on your team, but I'd rather make other bets at his cost. I do prefer Lad McConkey. I do prefer Xavier Worthy. In a lot of situations, I think I'd prefer Bo Nix if I need a quarterback. I'm totally happy to draft Brian Thomas at the 112 or the 201 with some of those other guys off the board, and I have seen him fall there. So it's not like you have to cross him off entirely. He's just not a guy that I'm prioritizing in the late first. All right, this next rookie is someone that I have maligned repeatedly on the Pure Potential podcast. He is one of my least favorite prospect profiles in the class, and that's Adonai Adonai Mitchell, whose current rookie draft ADP is at the 205. Mitchell is probably my biggest stand in this whole class, and he's probably a player that I will draft 0 shares of. I just don't like his profile or his situation. He wasn't a dominant producer in college in any of his 3 seasons. He wasn't really even an average producer if you're looking at highly drafted wide receivers. He was 30th in this class in best season yards per out run. He couldn't even get to 2.0 in any of his seasons. He got kind of alphaed by Xavier Worthy in the Texas offense. Even in his 2023 season, which was his breakout year, he only had an 18% target share. Now, that was a lot easier to overlook when I thought he was going to go in the 20s of the draft. I thought he was going to be a first round pick. That's what the mocks were projecting. But instead, he falls way past even the group of guys that go in the early second, like McConkey and Jalen Polk. And he falls into the back half of the second round where he goes to the Colts, which is not a situation that I'm super excited about for him. Michael Pittman is there, just had a 30% target share in 2023, signs a multi-year extension. In my eyes, he's the clear wide receiver 1 there. I'm not even 100% sure that AD Mitchell is better than Josh Downs, who had a good production profile in his own right and is going to man the slot there. Mitchell's going to slide into that Alec Pierce role, which is not really a fantasy-friendly role. I mean, he's better than Pierce. I think he'll be more productive than Alec Pierce, but it's a downfield vertical role in an offense that doesn't project to be high-end passing volume, right? Richardson is a rushing quarterback. Jonathan Taylor has a big contract. They're going to run the ball. So it's not high volume. It's not a role that lends itself to high volume. He's not the number 1 wide receiver there, and he doesn't really have a path to it. And we don't even know yet whether Anthony Richardson is a good quarterback in terms of passing. So there's just a lot of things there that are working against Mitchell. And at 205, going ahead of guys like Ricky Pearsall and Xavier Legette a lot of the time, who went in the first round, I'm just going to have to pass at that price. Okay, I promise they're not all wide receivers. My last guy is not a wide receiver, but we do have one more here in Troy Franklin, wide receiver out of Oregon, goes in the 4th round to the Denver Broncos, gets to play with his college quarterback, Bo Nix, but he goes a lot later in the draft than people were thinking. Goes in the 4th round. He was projected as like an early 2nd round pick throughout most of the draft process. And as a result of that pre-draft process, I think people are kind of anchoring to that because his Superflex ADP right now is 209. He's going ahead of Jalen Polk. He's going ahead of Marshawn Lloyd, sometimes Blake Corum, sometimes Xavier Legette. He's going ahead of guys that, frankly, he has no business going ahead of as a round 4 pick. Franklin had good age-adjusted production at Oregon. He looks good on paper, but the NFL did not agree with that. You can think of draft capital as kind of like a film grade because all of these NFL scouts are watching these wide receivers, and most of the time their decision is made based on what they see on the field. We don't really have any reason to believe that they're going off of things like breakout age or dominator rating when they're picking wide receivers. So in terms of the NFL film grade, Troy Franklin scored pretty poorly. Nobody in the top 2 or 3 rounds wanted to push the button on him. And before you leave a comment saying that Troy Franklin is the next Amon-Ra St. Brown or the next Stephon Diggs, we have to just take a step back and look at the history. There's been 386 wide receivers drafted in rounds 4 through 7 since the year 2000. Of those 386 wide receivers, only 14 of them have a career points per game above 10. So that's less than 4%, and 10 points per game is a pretty low threshold. I'm being generous here. There were 47 wide receivers that hit that mark last year, including day 3 wide receivers like Romeo Doubs and Noah Brown. But it's just not a high bar, and very few day 3 wide receivers can hit it. So you're making a really improbable bet, spending legit capital on Troy Franklin, and it's just not something that's worth chasing, regardless of what you thought about him before the draft. The numbers are the numbers. He doesn't have a flawless prospect profile, as evidenced by where he goes in the NFL draft. I think you really need to let him slip into like the mid-3rd round before he's worth considering over guys like Ben Sinnott or the other guys that I mentioned. All right, my last rookie to fade is going to be Jatavian Sanders, tight end out of Texas. He goes also in the 4th round to the Carolina Panthers. First pick in the 4th round, but 4th round nonetheless. And this is another guy that the pre-draft process liked a lot. He was the favorite to be the 2nd tight end off the board for quite a while, kind of slipped late in the process, not a super elite athlete, kind of undersized for the position. It doesn't really make sense to me that he's going ahead of Ben Sinnott in rookie drafts right now. I think Sanders needs to fall quite a bit from where he's currently going before I'm going to be interested. It's already hard enough for tight ends to truly matter in fantasy. I don't want to be chasing guys like Jatavian Sanders when there are legitimate running back and wide receiver bets on the board. He doesn't stack up well to other previous tight end prospects in terms of the production. He's not an elite athlete. He didn't get the draft capital. There's just not a lot to cling to at this point with him. And he's not even in an exciting offense. It's not like he gets a star quarterback. He's going to Carolina to play with Bryce Young. And I guess there's not a ton of target competition there, but we don't even know if Bryce Young is good yet. We don't know if this offense is going to be functional. So it's just a lot of things that have to break right for Sanders to really burn you. I would rather place bets elsewhere. Before I get you out of here today, I did promise one more target in rookie drafts. And this is a guy who slipped through on my first run through. And then I noticed him today when I was looking back at the ADP. That's Jermaine Burton, who I've gotten already in a couple of drafts in the third round. He goes in the third round of the NFL draft to the Bengals, and he has an interesting prospect profile. I think he kind of fell for some off-field concerns, but his production is very interesting. As a sophomore, when he played for the Georgia Bulldogs, he was second in receiving on that team, and that was a team that had A.D. Mitchell, that had Ladd McConkey, Brock Bowers, Darnell Washington, James Cook, Zamir White. I mean, it was a stacked offense. He was second in receiving. He transfers to Alabama as a junior, has kind of a down year in his first season there, but then as a senior really breaks out, hits that 30% dominator, has a super high ADOT, down the field threat. You could see him take over as the second wide receiver in Cincinnati as soon as next season. T. Higgins still doesn't have a long-term deal. They don't really seem close to locking down a long-term deal. I think this guy, he's kind of flying under the radar a little bit. I don't know why. Maybe because he was kind of buried in the sleeper ADP before the draft. But I think he's a great bet, just knowing that he is now attached to one of the more fantasy-friendly quarterbacks in the league, that Higgins could be on his way out, and that Burton's production profile is interesting in its own right. So anyway, there you have it. 5 rookies that I'm fading and one more rookie to target in your drafts. Between, those 11 players, you kind of have a little bit of a roadmap for how your rookie drafts play out. If you found this video or the last video helpful, please consider subscribing. I'm really closing in on that 100 subscriber mark, which I know isn't a lot, but does mean a lot to me. So if you consider clicking the button, I'd really appreciate it. And feel free to leave a comment down below if you have any questions about your rookie drafts. If you want me to help you make a decision when you're on the clock, I'd be happy to do that. You could also ask me on Twitter @PaulPattersonFF. Otherwise, good luck in your drafts, and I will see you guys soon with another video.